Welcome to Sapphic Nook. Today we're diving into something really special, a groundbreaking film from 1931 called Mädchen in Uniform. Now, I know what you're thinking. A film from the 1930s? Trust me, this one was way ahead of its time, and I'm excited to share why it matters so much to our community. We're introduced to young Manuela, a 14-and-a-half-year-old girl, and yes, that half year matters when you're that age, being dropped off at an all-girls Prussian boarding school by her aunt. Right from the start, you can feel the weight of expectations crushing down on this poor girl's shoulders. She's basically an orphan. Her mum has passed away, and her dad, being a military officer, isn't exactly equipped for raising a sensitive young girl. The way this scene unfolds just breaks my heart, you know? Here's Manuela, trying to hold back tears while her aunt basically tells the school staff that she's overly sensitive and a scatterbrain. Like, way to boost a kid's confidence. But what really gets me is when her aunt scolds her for crying, saying, "An officer's daughter crying." This already tells us so much about the strict, emotionless environment these girls are expected to thrive in. Now, let's talk about the school itself because, oh boy, is it a whole vibe. You've got these ridiculous rules that just scream control. Students can't even use the main stairs because those are reserved for the headmistress and guests. Talk about power trips. And then there's this whole uniform situation that's simultaneously heartbreaking and fascinating. They strip Manuela of her personal clothes, which she won't see again for 5 weeks, and give her a hand-me-down uniform. But here's where it gets interesting. On this uniform, there's a little heart carved with the initials EVB for Elizabeth von Bernberg, and apparently the previous owner had quite the crush on this teacher. Speaking of Fräulein von Bernberg, the way the other girls talk about her is just chef's kiss-perfect storytelling. They're all like, "Be careful you don't fall in love." And there's all this whispered gossip about how she kisses the girls goodnight. And can we talk about how they describe her? 1 minute she looks at you terribly, then all of a sudden she's very kind. The mystery, the intrigue. Some girls even call her the golden one. I mean, come on! The school's atmosphere is absolutely suffocating. Everything gets taken away from the girls. Their books, forbidden, their money, stored away, even their chocolate. And don't even get me started on the headmistress. This woman really said, "Through discipline and hunger and discipline, we shall be great again." Like, who hurt you, ma'am? The way she's running this place, you'd think feeding growing teenagers was a cardinal sin. But what makes this story so compelling is how it captures these little moments of rebellion and connection. You've got girls secretly keeping pictures of movie stars in their cupboards, whispering about Hans Alber's sex appeal, and dreaming about stuffed roast hare and coffee cake while they're scraping microscopic amounts of butter on their bread. It's these small acts of defiance that make the story so human and relatable. The tension is building beautifully in the start. We've got our protagonist, Manuela, thrust into this pressure cooker of an environment where emotions are forbidden, but somehow seem to be bubbling just beneath the surface everywhere you look. There's this fascinating undercurrent of forbidden feelings, especially surrounding the mysterious Fräulein von Bernberg, who seems to have this powerful effect on all the girls. Things are getting really interesting. Remember all that tension building in the school? Well, buckle up, because the story reveals so much more about our key characters and their relationships. So, the scene opens with this incredibly telling moment. The girls are singing hymns and being lectured about repenting their sins. But what really catches my attention is how the headmistress threatens the students about sending unapproved letters. She's basically saying she'll make them walk through town in their own clothes instead of uniforms as punishment, which, by the way, tells us everything about how shame is used as a weapon in this school. Now, let's talk about the heart of this section, the introduction of Fräulein von Bernburg's character in action. And oh my goodness, she's fascinating. Remember how the girls were all whispering about her before? Well, now we see why. There's this incredibly tender moment where she comforts Manuela about being motherless, and it's just different from everything else we've seen in this cold environment. She tells Manuela, "You must tell yourself that you'll be very happy here," and you can feel how she genuinely cares. But here's where it gets really interesting. The famous goodnight kisses everyone was gossiping about. They're real, and the way it's portrayed is so delicate yet powerful. The other teachers are totally scandalized by von Bernburg's teaching methods. There's this fantastic confrontation where they basically tell her she's too close to the students, and her response? "I try to be a friend to the children." The contrast between her approach and the school's rigid discipline is just chef's kiss, perfect storytelling. The tension really ramps up when Manuela gets called to von Bernburg's office. Y'all, this scene is everything. It starts innocently enough. They're discussing a worn-out petticoat, because apparently this poor girl's aunt sent her to school with clothes full of holes. But then it transforms into this incredibly emotional moment where Manuela just opens her heart completely. She tells von Bernburg how she stares at her door in the darkness, how she thinks about her kissing other girls goodnight after she leaves the school. It's simultaneously innocent and intense. Von Bernburg's response is so complex. Don't be a little girl, be a good comrade. She's trying to maintain boundaries while still showing care, and when she says, "I think of you often, Manuela," whew, the complexity of emotions there is just incredible. Meanwhile, we get these perfect little glimpses of regular teenage life happening in the background. The girls are doing science experiments, dropping things down holes to measure gravity, 9.81, in case you're curious, and trying to smuggle letters home complaining about being hungry. It's these moments that make the story feel so real and relatable, even though it's set nearly a century ago. But then comes the drama with the play. The school is preparing for the headmistress's birthday celebration, and Manuela is clearly excited about performing. She's practicing her lines. "Hold, O Queen. Long was I sunk in a delusive dream." But then everything goes sideways when Ilse's smuggled letter about being hungry gets intercepted. The poor girl gets kicked out of the play, and you can just feel how these small acts of rebellion are met with such harsh punishment. What makes this section so powerful is how it shows the contrast between natural human connections and the rigid system trying to suppress them. You've got von Bernburg representing this more nurturing, understanding approach to education, while the rest of the school staff is all about discipline and distance. And caught in the middle of all this is Manuela, whose emotional honesty makes her both vulnerable and brave in this environment. Oh my goodness, everyone, this part is where everything comes to a head, and the drama is absolutely incredible. We start with the preparation for Schiller's Don Carlos. And can we talk about how perfectly this play choice mirrors what's happening in the school? It's all about forbidden love and rebellion against authority. The parallels are just a chef's kiss. So Manuela is playing Don Carlos, and she's putting her whole heart into it. There's this beautiful irony in her delivering lines like, "Let them come here and drag me to the scaffold." A moment spent in paradise like this is not too clearly purchased by a life. Like, hello, foreshadowing? The performance goes amazingly well, and even the strict teachers have to admit she was talented. But here's where things get wild. After the play, there's this celebration with a punch, and yes, they actually made it alcoholic. These girls are sneaky. Manuela, who's already emotionally high from her successful performance and feeling emboldened, starts getting tipsy. And then, then, she does something that changes everything. She stands up and makes this passionate declaration of love for Fräulein von Bernberg in front of everyone. The aftermath is brutal. The school administration is horrified. They're talking about expelling her, sending her to reform school, treating her like she's committed some terrible crime. The contrast between Manuela's pure, innocent expression of love and the harsh, punitive response from the adults is just heartbreaking. They even tell her she should be cursed, like way to traumatize a teenager. The school's response is to put Manuela in isolation. They literally create a social boycott around her. All the other students are forbidden from speaking to her under threat of punishment. It's this incredibly cruel form of emotional torture, especially for a young girl who's already struggling with losing her mother and feeling isolated. There's this fascinating scene where a princess visits the school and everyone's trying to maintain this perfect facade. The irony is thick here. They're all pretending everything's fine while literally emotionally torturing a student. When the princess mentions knowing Manuela's mother and hoping she'll be the pride of the school, the dramatic irony is almost too much to bear. But here's what's really interesting. We see some resistance forming. Edelgard, bless her heart, defies the orders and tries to reach out to Manuela because she's worried about her. And von Bernberg herself stands up to the headmistress saying, "I know Manuela and the others better than you. I'm close to the children. I love them." The headmistress's snippy response about giving away petticoats shows just how little she understands about actual human connection and care. The tension between von Bernberg's nurturing approach and the school's rigid discipline reaches its breaking point here. The scene between von Bernberg and Manuela is just heartbreaking. Manuela is told she'll be locked away, not like prison, they say, just isolated, because that makes it so much better, right? And when Manuela learns she'll never be allowed to see von Bernberg again, she utters those chilling words, "I couldn't live." The way von Bernberg responds is complex. She tells Manuela she must be cured, but you can feel her own pain in having to say these words. When Manuela asks, "Cured? Of what?" and von Bernberg replies, "You shouldn't love me so much." It's this moment of devastating honesty. Manuela's simple response of "why not?" captures all the innocence and purity of her feelings, making the school's harsh response seem even more cruel by contrast. The tension builds as von Bernberg defies the headmistress one last time by speaking to Manuela, leading to her resignation. Her parting words are powerful. "I can't stay here. I can't stand by and see children made into scared, helpless creatures." She's finally taking a stand against the system, but at what cost? And then we reach the climax. Manuela, desperate and seeing no way forward, attempts to throw herself from a height. The other girls, showing true solidarity despite the threats and punishments, rush to save her. The final scene, with the girls praying the Lord's Prayer while this drama unfolds, creates this incredible contrast between the rigid religious structure of the school and the raw, real human emotions playing out. The headmistress's final realization comes too late. We must thank God. The girls have prevented a tragedy which we both would have regretted all of our lives. It's a powerful acknowledgement that their harsh system nearly led to devastating consequences. What makes this ending so powerful is how it shows that love and human connection will always find a way to express themselves, even in the most oppressive environments. The girls saving Manuela isn't just about preventing a tragedy. It's an act of rebellion against a system that tries to suppress natural human emotions and connections. This film was revolutionary for 1931, not just in its portrayal of sapphic love, but in its criticism of authoritarian educational systems, and its message about the importance of emotional support and understanding in young people's lives. The way it handles themes of forbidden love, institutional oppression, and the power of human connection feels incredibly modern even today. Let's talk a bit about the profound significance of Mädchen in Uniform and its groundbreaking role in cinema history. When we talk about LGBTQ+ representation in film, it's absolutely remarkable that in 1931, a German film dared to tell such a sensitive and nuanced story about same-sex attraction. What makes Mädchen in Uniform particularly significant is how it approached its subject matter, not with scandal or sensation, but with genuine emotional depth and understanding. The film's portrayal of the relationship between Manuela and Fräulein von Bernburg is masterfully crafted. Rather than sensationalizing their connection, it presents it as a natural development within the boarding school environment. The way Manuela's feelings are portrayed, through longing glances, emotional confessions, and that symbolically charged petticoat gift, creates a tender portrait of first love that resonates regardless of gender or sexuality. What's particularly revolutionary about this film is its refusal to morally condemn these feelings. In an era when same-sex attraction was typically portrayed as deviant or sinful, if it was portrayed at all, Mädchen in Uniform presents Manuela's feelings as pure and genuine. The villain of the story isn't her love for von Bernburg, but rather the oppressive system trying to suppress natural human emotions. The timing of this film's release makes it even more remarkable. Remember, this was 1931 Germany, just 2 years before the Nazi Party would come to power. The Nazis would later ban the film and burn many copies, seeing it as a threat to their ideological agenda. The film's progressive stance on sexuality, its criticism of authoritarian education, and its focus on female relationships all stood in direct opposition to Nazi ideals about women's roles and proper German society. The film's all-female cast and crew was also revolutionary for its time. Director Leontine Sagan and writer Krista Winslow created a uniquely female perspective that went beyond the male gaze that dominated cinema. They showed women as complex emotional beings, capable of deep connections and conflicts that had nothing to do with men. This was radical for 1931, when most films relegated women to romantic interest roles or maternal figures. The way the film handles women's emotions is particularly significant. It doesn't dismiss or trivialize the intense feelings that develop between women in close-knit environments like boarding schools. Instead, it treats these emotions with respect and understanding. The film acknowledges that love between women, whether romantic or platonic, is a valid and important part of human experience. Consider how the film uses the character of Fräulein von Bernburg to challenge traditional power structures. She represents a different kind of authority figure, one based on emotional connection rather than rigid discipline. Her approach to education, emphasizing care and understanding over strict obedience, was a direct challenge to the authoritarian educational methods prevalent in Germany at the time. The film's subtle yet clear criticism of institutional oppression was also ahead of its time. Through its portrayal of the boarding school's strict regime, it comments on how societal institutions can crush individuality and natural human connections. This criticism extended beyond just educational institutions. It was a broader commentary on how society attempts to control and suppress non-conforming individuals and relationships. The film's influence extends well beyond its time. It essentially created a template for how to tell LGBTQ+ stories with dignity and depth. Its influence can be seen in later films like Carol, 2015, and Portrait of a Lady on Fire, 2019, which similarly focus on the emotional complexity of same-sex relationships rather than treating them as scandalous or sensational. The film's significance also lies in what it represents historically, a moment of progressive openness in Weimar Germany before the darkness of the Nazi era descended. It stands as a testament to what was possible in terms of artistic expression and social commentary before political repression shut down such conversations. In this way, it serves not only as an important piece of LGBTQ+ cinema history, but also as a reminder of how precious and fragile artistic freedom can be. Looking back at Mädchen in Uniform from our current perspective, it's clear that this film was not just ahead of its time. It helped pave the way for more honest and nuanced representations of same-sex relationships in cinema. Its legacy lives on in every film that dares to tell LGBTQ+ stories with dignity, complexity, and emotional truth. Now, the fascinating and often overlooked impacts of Mädchen in Uniform extend far beyond its initial release. The film's journey through censorship is particularly intriguing. When it arrived in the United States in 1932, censors initially banned it completely, not just for its sapphic themes, but because they felt it portrayed authority figures, particularly the teachers, in a negative light. Eleanor Roosevelt herself had to intervene to get the film approved for American audiences, though even then it was heavily edited. This intervention by the First Lady speaks volumes about the film's artistic merit and cultural significance. In France, the film actually found a more welcoming audience. French critics praised its psychological depth and artistic merit, viewing it through the lens of avant-garde cinema rather than focusing solely on its controversial themes. This French reception helped preserve the film's legacy during the dark years that followed. The film's survival story is remarkable. During the Nazi regime's systematic destruction of degenerate art, several copies were preserved by film archivists who recognized its importance. A complete version was discovered in a German archive in the 1970s, leading to a restoration project that helped introduce the film to new generations. The film's influence on filmmaking techniques is often overlooked. It pioneered several camera techniques for portraying unspoken attraction, lingering close-ups, meaningful glances, and subtle physical interactions that would become staples of romantic cinema. Modern directors like Todd Haynes have acknowledged how these techniques influence their own work in films like Carol. In terms of acting style, Mädchen in Uniform was revolutionary. At a time when silent films' exaggerated expressions were still influential, it showcased a more naturalistic performance style, particularly in intimate scenes. This approach to depicting emotional vulnerability would influence European cinema for decades. One of the most interesting aspects of the film's legacy is how it influenced underground LGBTQ+ culture during periods of censorship. In the 1950s and 60s, when explicit representation was still taboo, discussion of Mädchen in Uniform became a kind of code among queer women to signal their identity and find community. Film societies would organize secret screenings, and discussions of the film's themes provided a safe way to talk about same-sex attraction. The film's impact on education reform movements is also noteworthy. In post-war Germany, as educators worked to develop new, less authoritarian teaching methods, Mädchen in Uniform was studied as a critique of Prussian educational systems. Its portrayal of the damaging effects of rigid discipline helped support arguments for more humane, student-centered approaches. In terms of fashion and visual culture, the film unexpectedly influenced lesbian aesthetics. The school uniforms, and particularly Fräulein von Bernberg's sophisticated style, became reference points for lesbian fashion, especially in European circles. This visual influence can be traced through photographs and art from the 1930s through the 1950s. The film's restoration in the 1970s coincided with the rise of feminist film theory, leading to fascinating new interpretations. Scholars began analyzing it not just as a lesbian narrative, but as a critique of patriarchal power structures and an exploration of female solidarity. This academic interest helped secure its place in film studies curricula. The film's impact on international cinema is particularly interesting. In Japan, it influenced a whole genre of girls' school films, Serafu Tojigwan Chong, or sailor suit and machine gun genre, which explored similar themes of intense female friendships and rebellion against authority. While these films often stayed away from explicit lesbian themes, they borrowed heavily from Mädchen in uniforms, visual language, and emotional storytelling. Contemporary filmmakers continue to draw inspiration from specific scenes and techniques. The famous staircase scenes, where girls lean over the railings to watch others below, have been referenced in numerous films about boarding schools and forbidden love. The way the film handles the power dynamics between teachers and students has influenced everything from the prime of Miss Jean Brodie to the children's hour. The film also had an unexpected impact on costume design in cinema. Its portrayal of uniforms as both constraining and sensual influenced how costumes are used to tell stories about power and resistance. This influence can be seen in films ranging from If to The Handmaid's Tale. The film's legacy also lives on in unexpected ways through fan culture. Modern fans create art, write fiction, and engage in detailed analysis of the film online, keeping its story alive and relevant for new generations. This continuing engagement shows how the film's themes of love, resistance, and personal authenticity continue to resonate. All right, friends, let's take a moment to process this absolutely incredible piece of cinema history. Mädchen in Uniform isn't just any film from 1931. It's a masterpiece that dared to tell a story that many wouldn't even whisper about for decades to come. Let's pull all the threads together. We started with Manuela, this sensitive 14-and-a-half-year-old girl, and yes, that half was very important to her, being dropped off at a Prussian boarding school. Already motherless, she's essentially stripped of whatever identity she had left. Her clothes, her books, even her hair isn't her own anymore. But in this rigid, militaristic environment, something beautiful and unexpected happens. She finds love. Now, what makes this film absolutely revolutionary for its time is how it handles Manuela's growing feelings for Fräulein von Bernburg. There's no scandal, no villainization, just a pure, honest portrayal of a young girl's first love. Remember that moment with the carved initials EVB in Manuela's handed-down uniform? That wasn't just a detail, it was a sign that these feelings weren't new to this institution, that love finds a way even in the most suppressive environments. In front of everyone, this young girl stands up and declares her love for her teacher. It's this beautiful, tragic moment of pure emotion breaking through all that Prussian discipline. But here's what really gets me about this film. It's not just a love story. It's a critique of an entire system that values conformity over humanity. When the school administration responds to Manuela's confession by completely isolating her, by treating her like she's committed some horrible crime, the film is really asking us, who's really wrong here? The young girl whose only crime was loving too openly and honestly? Or the system that would rather break her spirit than acknowledge her feelings? And let's talk about Fräulein von Bernburg for a moment. Her character is fascinating because she represents this middle ground between the rigid institution and the emotional needs of her students. When she's confronted about giving Manuela that petticoat, her defense is so simple and heartbreaking. The girl has no mother. In just 5 words, she exposes the fundamental flaw in the system. It's trying to replace human warmth with military discipline. What makes this film absolutely incredible, especially for 1931, is that it doesn't just end with punishment and tragedy. It becomes this powerful statement about solidarity and resistance against inhumane systems. You've got Edelgard willing to risk everything to stand by her friend. You've got the other students struggling with their own consciences about the boycott. And you've got Fräulein von Bernburg herself, caught between her duty to the institution and her understanding of what these young women really need. In the end, Mädchen in Uniform isn't just a story about forbidden love in a girls' boarding school. It's about the human spirit's resistance to systems that try to crush individuality and emotion. It's about the courage to love openly in a world that demands conformity. And most importantly, it's about the choice we all face at some point. Do we stay silent to protect ourselves, or do we stand up for what we believe is right? This film walked so that many other stories could run. It's a reminder that love stories have always been diverse, that resistance to oppressive systems has always existed, and that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply being true to yourself. So, what do you think about this groundbreaking piece of cinema? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts about how this 1931 film speaks to us today. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into cinema history, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. Until next time, keep watching, keep thinking, and most importantly, keep questioning the systems that try to tell us who we can and cannot love.